Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Evans. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. How's it going tonight?
I am doing well, sir. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm surviving.
So one of the things that I really like is anytime the experiences that we have throughout the week mirror the things that people write in on the show. Our first email tonight comes in from Greg, and he says, "Hi, Steve and Noah. I listened to Steve's reasons for switching away from Image. He may want to take another look at it. I have an iOS app, and when I click share, I can just share the image itself via text or email. No more IT guy style links." So it's funny. There's a bit of providence in this, I think, because as it turns out, you absolutely did look at Image another time, and unfortunately, it bit you another time.
Yeah, so I guess if I was to recap, I'm not going to go through all of it. I'll save you all much time. But when I first started looking at Image, I went through, I read all the documentation. I did all the fancy things you could do. I set up like remote ML and various agents to do different things. And I allowed like this host to do that type of job. And this one did this type of job. And I went through, and it was all great, nerdy fun, right? I also tried to use their external libraries feature. Not tried, I did. So all of that to say is like I went really deep, and I went and turned all of the knobs, and I broke something, right? We've documented many times on the show about how I broke something. I don't know what it was. Doesn't matter. Point is, like, I definitely broke something, and I am completely at fault because I went and turned all the knobs, and before having a good understanding of like whether I should or not. The next time that I tried things, I dialed it back significantly. Okay, so I didn't do any of that fun stuff. In fact, I tried to follow what I understood to be the prescribed path, with the caveat that, as Noah has kind of coached me, I'm not the typical user. I had all of my files on my disk and not on a phone or not in Google Photos for takeout or any of that sort of stuff. So I was trying to upload all of my 25,000 photos via the web UI and eventually was able to do so. But, that's kind of the path that I took. When it broke itself the last time, I just kind of left it down. That was I thought I did everything kind of in the default fashion, or as much as I might personally do defaults, because I often go and twiddle something. I can't tell you what I did this time. And it broke, and it is like I didn't read the release notes, and I broke something between releases because I didn't update it all the time. Totally my fault. This very last time, we haven't talked about how it broke itself very recently, like within the last week and a half. And I say that because I logged in, and it gave me the little readout of like, hey, you're using 150 gigs of space or whatever it was. Like, okay, where did all the photos go? And there were no photos in my UI. And it was like, I don't even know what I did to break it this time.
Because to be clear, you didn't really step outside the box second time around. You did it basically exactly what most other, the way that Image says you should set it up.
I got a box, I threw a 5060 Ti on it, and I did the Docker install exactly as the doc said. I did nothing different. I may have changed the little paths that you mount in, but aside from that, like, I did nothing outside of that norm. I tried to be as vanilla as possible. I recovered myself by reverting a ZFS snapshot. And again, I upgraded between versions. I think that's what the problem is. I didn't invest more than 20 minutes. When I rolled back the snapshot to the time before I ran the Docker update, everything was fine. So that's what I assume I did again. It bit me last time. Dumb end user. This is the third time that I've kind of stubbed my toe on the fact that I didn't actually go and read the release notes or do any kind of prep. I just did the, pull, down, up, and then I walked away. Mm-hmm. This time I did a down, up, and I was like, oh, well, everything looks like it started, and I walked away. And it wasn't until I actually went to the web UI, I went to do the search, because there are some things I legitimately like better in image. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to be clear about that. I am not a hater. I like the search. I like the deduplication. And I also like the way that it is generally fairly good at understanding that this is person X at 3 years old, at 5 years old, at 10 years old, and it kind of groups those together. You still have to go and label it, but it groups them together and is kind of able to piece that together. It does those things real well. I don't know what I did this time. I don't know what changed between versions. Sigh.
So here's the downside, right? The downside is that at the same time that you're stubbing your toe, and from your perspective, not doing anything really outside the box, just using the thing the way you were told to use the thing. And to steal your words, you're not exactly a technical Luddite, right? It's not like you're some uneducated noob that has no idea what he's doing. And so at the same time that seemingly continues to happen without any real obvious explanation, at the same time, you seem to be having a wonderful time with Enti, and it seems to be taking off like wildfire. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is not like there's not a paid promotion. It's nothing like that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's one of those things where my wife had friends over and I happened to be walking by and she's showing them Enti. That never once happened in the year and a half that we've had Image in the house. Not once has that happened. And so it's just one of those things where it has reached a bit of a mind share in the house. And then I have some other reasons. So we decided that we were going to also pay for the service in order to keep the project going. So we're still using the self-hosted version. That is the primary one. It has a feature that's called constant export or something like that, continuous export. And so it will just export the files with the metadata and put them in a directory on your hard drive so that it's outside of the object storage. And what I did was I just pointed, so because Enti has desktop clients, like it's basically got clients for all the things, I pointed the desktop client at that directory because like other sync things, you can point it at a directory and it will just watch that directory. So I went to bed and the next morning, Enti Cloud had all of my photos with all of the things in the proper albums. And I assume that's because when you dump the export, it puts like a bunch of JSON metadata in beside the pictures. And so I assume what happened was it read the metadata and just shoved the pictures in the appropriate albums. So it was a very positive experience all around. I was expecting to have to, like, when you do this in Image and you're not having all the photos in an easy takeout, like on a phone or with Google Takeout, you have to basically drag the folders one at a time into the web UI. And then after they're uploaded, you make your albums and whatever, right? And it is what it is. I didn't have to do that with this. And that just made me kind of heart the project even more.
Huh. So Enti is effectively for you, you didn't really have a vested interest in either of these two things. It was more of the spousal approval thing, right? And all of a sudden, that starts to take off. And so what you're doing is jumping in the boat that already has some gas in the motor, and it's kind of taken off. And
it's left the dock, and I'm just catching up.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. So is there a point where you say, it continues to fall down and it's just not worth putting back up again? Or is it still it's kind of worth running in parallel because?
I mean, it definitely keeps me humble. So maybe there's something for that.
Continue to write in with your feedback, your thoughts. What do you like? What do you dislike? Here's the other thing I think would be interesting, Steve. I'd like to hear from some people that are using Enti. One of the things that we talked about in the pre-show that I feel like has a tremendous amount of value is when the tide rises, all the boats rise, right? And so to a degree, a better NT makes a better image. A better image makes a better NT. When there are problems with NT, it causes it causes image to shine. When there are problems with image, it causes NT to shine. So really, these competing projects and having a bunch of people try both is kind of better for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And I legitimately like NT. There's just, have you ever met people where you're like, I've never had that experience? So one of the things that was very common for me would be I would hear people say about, particularly about Gnome 3 and the point releases, like, it didn't do this, or it crashed all the time, or it did this thing. And like, I used it and deployed it, and I have it in like 10 computers and never had this problem. It's not that I didn't believe the other people. It's just like I didn't hit the sample size of whatever it was that caused me the problem. I found the software that I am in that odd sample size that just seems to be plagued with problems. I don't think it's a problem with the software. I think it's whatever weird combination of software and whatever, how I'm using it, that is contributing to it. I think everybody just bumps into that every once in a while.
Yeah, 100%. Where would you leave people by way of, here's the thing, here's what you're doing, or here's the direction you're going, or here's what you're going to be doing?
I mean, I think we're in the NT boat. I think that's where we're going to land. I probably will run image in parallel because because it's not in use, it's not really sucking down all of the resources. So I guess it'll just continue to survive until it breaks bad enough that I can't repair it with a rollback.
1-855-450 Noah, 855-450-6624. The email live at asknoahshow.com. Our second email comes in from Pete. Pete writes in and says, "Hi Noah and Steve. I don't have a question, but I just listened to last week's episode and I wanted to say thank you so much for a great segment on Expedition 33. I got a Steam gift card for Christmas and it was very back and forth on which game to buy. After listening to how much Steve enjoyed Expedition, I'm going to go ahead and get that now. Keep up the great work. I really enjoyed it." So Steve, there's one for you. Here's the second one I would tell you. I absolutely went and purchased Expedition for my kid because he's very much into games. And after listening to your review, I'm like, listen, I just heard all through the pre-show and all through an episode of Ask Noah Show how great this game is. You've got to try this thing. So there's at least a couple of people that purchased it on your recommendation.
Did any early reviews from your kid?
Well, here's the little dirty secret. So I get it for him, and it just so happened that the day that we did that episode was a day that I was trying to let's go with grow my children a little bit. And so they from their perspective, they had a very stressful day. From my perspective, there were some growing exercises that were occurring that day. And so he did really good. And so that was kind of my excuse to buy it for him was, hey, I really appreciate the level of effort in what you did today. So here you go. And so I, like you, wanted to know, what do you think? And so night one, I asked him, what do you think? I haven't installed it yet. Night two, I ask him, what do you think? I haven't installed it yet. Night three, when he says, I haven't installed it yet, I finally follow up to say, why have you not installed it yet? What is the thing that is preventing you from installing this game? And what I learned was he's out of hard drive space. And not only is, well, it gets better. So he's out of hard drive space and he's such a little budget hawk that I go, well, how have you been dealing with other games? He goes, oh, well, here's what I do. When I want to play this game, I uninstall the games that I need to free up the amount of space that I need. Then I install the game that I want to play. Then I play that game for a little bit. And then when I get sick of that game, then I uninstall that game and uninstall the next round of games that I want to play. And so he's cycling through disk space to avoid spending any money to buy another drive because he doesn't want to expend any of his funds. He wants to be budgetarily, and so to a degree, like as a dad, what do I do? So I it's one of those things, and so that Expedition 33 specifically is enough disk space that it would require him to take off more games that he's not wanting to do. So where we kind of left it is, he's going to wait until those games run their course until he's sick of them, and then those games will come off and Expedition 33 will go in. The other thing that I've tried to encourage him to do is he's got a spinning disc that he's not currently using, and I've tried to encourage him to put games on there, and he asked some interesting questions. If you place games on a spinning disc, is there any sort of a performance degradation from the standpoint that the initial load is going to be, fine. You get it from the spinning disk into RAM, and then it's in RAM, and it's fine. But as it needs to load game assets and other things, is that going to negatively affect the overall performance? And me not being a gamer, I don't know the answer to that. Do you know the answer to that?
Generally speaking, the answer is no. It really depends on how heavy the game is in terms of is it designed to load a bunch of stuff into RAM, and how does it handle dynamically loading things and stuff like that? For a very long time, I actually just used to load things over the network off of my NAS. So,
really?
Yep, because why not? So it really depends. It depends. It's a game by game sort of situation. And I don't know, I'm using a micro SD card in my Steam Deck, and I don't notice it. I really don't notice much other than load time between that and the NVMe that I put in as the main drive. So I don't know if that's exactly the same sample size, but it's still, I still have a spinning Rust drive in for my larger games.
Yeah, 100%. And here's the other thing though too, is like if you can do it off of a NAS, I have to believe that you could easily do it off of a spinning disk.
The latency is better off your spinning disk than off your NAS, so sure.
Yeah, I would think so. 1-855-450 NOAA, 855-450-6624. The email live at Ask Noah Show.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of January 11th, 2026, here's the Linux and open source news. Curl 8.18 has been released. Doxygen 1.16 is out. Windowmaker Live 13.3 has been released. Budgie 10.10 is now available. In distro news, Pen2 2026.0 has been released. Nitrix 5.1 is available. Debian 13.3 is now out. And Linux Mint 22.3 has been released. In open source hardware news, Bose decides that instead of bricking its old wireless speakers, they'll make them open source. In open source security news, a Chinese threat actor known as UAT 7290 has been attributed to espionage-focused intrusions against entities in South Asia and Southeastern Europe by attacking Linux systems with a Linux-based malware suite including Rushdrop, DriveSwitch, and SilentRaid. The Go Bruteforcer botnet is targeting 50,000-plus Linux servers. A new advanced Linux VoidLink malware is targeting cloud and container environments. And in open source AI news, News Research has released NewsCoder 14b, and Razer has introduced AI Kit, an open source project for easier local LLM development.
So, Steve, I fell down a unbelievable rabbit hole this week. And, well, actually, I fell down a rabbit hole a few weeks ago, and I haven't been able to climb myself out. Are you familiar with VSTs, or virtual instruments?
Only as much as you've talked about them on the show.
So let's do this. 855-450-NOAA. That's 855-450-6624. The email live at AskNoahShow.com. You're on Ask Noah. Good afternoon.
Hey, Noah. Long-time fan since the old Jupiter days. I wanted to talk about ButterFS Assistant.
Sure.
Okay. I consider it to be feature incomplete because I did this experiment on my own. I put it on a virtual machine. I do a backup, and my idea is that what if your system got totally wiped out and all you got is this ButterFS backup file, right? You cannot, at least from as far as I can tell, you cannot restore it. The timeline seems to be immutable. Does that sound right?
Steve, might punt this to you. Do you have thoughts?
So I'm not exactly sure what we're talking. So I have a bunch of VMs and some one-off machines, as well as my dad's machine is running the B2FS, ButterFS. I'm not exactly sure. It creates a .snapshot directory, and it essentially does a bunch of linking in there for its snapshots, but I'm not exactly sure what you mean by when you're trying to restore it. I'm not quite following.
Okay. you say you have a machine that you want to back up, and you back up your one of your snapshots on, say, a USB drive, and sorry, I got distracted by the echo. Okay, you put it on a USB drive and say that your whole file system gets wiped out, and that you have to, you wanted to restore it using the ButterFS Restore. As far as I can tell, you can do a snapshot from, back up a snapshot that you have in the timeline. That's fine. That all works great. But I'm saying, what if you had to restore whatever you needed to restore from a backup, and your system got completely wiped out and you had to reinstall?
So all systems that take snapshots have what they call the base snapshot and then incrementals. And so the base snapshot is pretty much a clone of the entire system, and it's very large. And then your incrementals are small. And so if you tried to grab one of your incrementals and restore from that, it would not work without the base, because essentially the incrementals are just what has changed since I took a baseline of the system. And so,
okay, yeah, I understand that. Okay.
So you're right, they are linear. And let's say you had snapshots 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you somehow lost 2 and 3. You would have some problem with that because they all stand on top of each other. Most file systems that have a snapshotting ability will also have the ability to make like a checkpoint snapshot or something like that, where it kind of rolls up all of the snapshots before it, so that you don't have to have 40 snapshots hanging around and all do them in sequence. But you're right. If you have snapshots in a sequence and you lose one of them, or you try and just use the very last one, it will not work unless you have all of them.
Okay. But if you would be able to restore everything if you had all your incrementals then?
Yes. Yep. So most of these rely on sending your backups off somewhere else, whether it's actually restoring them to a data set in a backup scenario, or whether they're just storing it. You be aware that you are essentially cloning your system when you do that.
Yeah, and it's a lot of space. I do understand that.
Does that answer your question? Do we help you?
Oh yeah, man, that was great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate the call. 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. So I fell down a rabbit hole, I don't know, maybe a few months before, maybe a month or so before Christmas, and I haven't been able to climb my way out. And the rabbit hole that I fell down is music production on Linux. And I would tell you that going into it, I had the very firm belief that things were not going to be great on Linux, that the vast majority of the industry is either on Windows or Mac OS. And so because of that, all of the software manufacturers and all the plugin manufacturers have moved to doing things on the main proprietary systems. Here's the rock and the hard place I found myself in. The reality is that very few places are making regular instruments anymore. So for comparison, Yamaha only sold 10,000 pianos last year. So it's a remarkable decline. And the reality is just nobody wants to buy big, huge acoustic pianos. They don't want to maintain them. They don't want to tune them. They don't want to do all of that. And so what is taking off in their place, you've got a couple of options. Option one is stage pianos. So stage pianos, well, actually, let me take it one step further. Option one is what they call hybrid pianos. So a hybrid piano is basically they put very specific microphones along the soundboard and they sample at very specific places. Then they build a replica of a soundboard with speakers in that soundboard and then they play those sampled sounds back at the exact same place. And so the idea is that if you play the electric version, it sounds identical to the acoustic version. The problem is they're about $20,000 plus to buy one of these hybrid pianos. Option 2 is what's known as a stage piano. Stage pianos are kind of I would think kind of the best middle ground. They have sampled sounds, and they have hammer-like action, so the feel is very similar, if not identical. The sound is very similar, if not identical. The thing that it's missing is it's not doing the fancy soundboard sampling on the thing, and so it doesn't look like an acoustic piano. It doesn't sound like an acoustic piano. You're playing it through speakers. But if you can live with that compromise, you go from like $20,000 to the Nords, I think, are like $5,000, and then the Kauai has one that's in like the $3,000, $4,000 range. But I mean, you're still spending a lot of money, but it's kind of the best mix of both worlds. It's still an instrument that produces a sound in and of itself and has the feel of a regular acoustic instrument. Everything south of that, there are some pretty significant compromises, and then you've got to decide what you can live with and what you can live without. So where this journey started was with a plugin called Pianotech. And Pianotech is a modeled piano. So there's two different ways that you can do an instrument. One is sampled, where you actually record the way that you play the thing. The second is where you take the math of how it produces the sound and you try to recreate it. The recreation version is modeling. The other side is sampling. Sampling is largely considered to be the better of the two, but modeling has some advantages by way of you can change the sound if you want to modify it, if you're not just looking to reproduce exactly what's there. I digress. So Pianotech is a piano model, and it's probably one of the best softwares out there that does modeling for piano. And they released it in such a way that it works perfectly on Linux. And so that kind of got me started down this rabbit hole. And so I was playing with it, and I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. And the more I played with it, and the more I got familiar with it, the more I started to think, man, if this works really well, I wonder what other things are out there that work really well on Linux as well. And so I started to look at virtual instruments. And what I figured out is, so you have the hybrid pianos, you have the stage pianos, but really everything under, if you're not willing to spend $3,000 or $4,000, everything south of that, you're either buying prosumer stuff that really isn't that great to begin with, or people are buying controllers like USB MIDI controllers that are then controlling a piece of software, and they're back to something like a Pianotech. And that is the way the vast majority of the music industry is going. And the reason they're going that way is Taylor Swift, when she's recording a music album, she is not hiring a huge band to come sit, and they're not doing recording inside of a studio session. She's laying sideways on a couch while her producer is sitting in front of a computer, and he goes, what are you looking for there, T-Swizzle? And she goes, well, I want, this kind of piano, or this kind of a drum beat. And so he goes through the little samples, beep up, nope, not that one, doop, doop, nope, that one, yeek up, whoop, whoop, that one sounds great. Okay. And then they pick that one, and then that's what you go with the beat. And then what do you want to put over that? Well, I'll put a little synthy pad over here, and so it's all happening on a controller. So I fell deep down this rabbit hole of who makes controllers and who makes this kind of stuff. And so essentially they arrive in three different versions. The version 1, and the thing that I think is most worth spending money on, are hammer graded controllers. So it's 88 keys, it's hammer graded and weighted keys. And so effectively it feels exactly like a piano. And you can get them as cheap as $450-ish from companies like Yamaha. The go-to on the socials, this is a side tangent, but the world has, in my opinion, devolved, but you might say evolved, depending on your point of view, from professionals who are doing this stuff to just who can get the most likes on YouTube. If you're going for on the socials, who gets the most likes on YouTube, Arturia, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, takes the cake. And so that's what all the kids these days are using for controllers, and they're in about the $1,000 range for their key station thing. And that is the best, in my opinion, the best compromise between once you go the VST route, once you go it's not going to make a sound, it's just a computer controller, and it's going to plug in, and then you're going to plug some piece of software in on the other side. Once you go that route, then if you can get the hammer graded controller, you're getting the same feel. And if you pair it with something like Pianotech, you're going to get really solid sounds. And so that's going to be pretty darn good. Below that is what's known as semi-weighted keys, and so that's going to not be a great experience. It'll be fine for picking stuff out. It's fine for doing music production, but you wouldn't want to learn on that because you won't be able to translate those skills directly one-to-one to a real acoustic instrument. And then at the very end is what's known as synth keys, and that's probably the worst possible thing that you can buy from the standpoint that it's not at all designed to replicate the real feel of a piano. It's really designed just to put input in. I mean, it's a totally different thing at that point. But you can go anywhere on that spectrum. So I picked up myself the worst possible thing. I went with not only a synth controller, but I went with the cheapest possible synth controller, and I went with the synth controller that doesn't have all 88 keys. Now, and this is a story from the past traumatic form of my childhood, was forced to take piano lessons for 15 years. And so I grew up playing on an acoustic piano. I'm well acquainted with what a good piano feels like, what it sounds like, how to play it, all that sort of thing. If you don't have any experience with the piano, I would encourage you in the strongest possible way to not follow in my footsteps, because you will pick up bad habits that you don't want. But if you have experience and your goal is not to replicate the perfect environment of a piano, but just to produce the sounds that a piano produces, the Akai Professional MPK Mini Plus USB MIDI controller is a 37-inch MIDI controller that fits inside of my backpack, has 8 little pads for doing percussion stuff, has a number of little knobs and doodads and controls, has a nice little LCD display, and then has 37 keys. Now, again, if you have experience doing piano and you're okay doing some finger gymnastics to get your fingers to cross and do those sorts of things that any piano teacher would tell you is a horrible thing and you absolutely shouldn't do it, then this is an okay thing. If you don't have any experience, I can't encourage you in the strongest possible way, don't go this route. Or if you're going to play one key at a time and play things in. So I picked this up just basically so that I'd have something to plug into my laptop with MIDI and I could start playing with it. So it arrives, I take it out of the box, I plug it into Pianotech, and it works flawlessly. And it's great, it does all the things, and I'm really happy with it. The only thing I was unhappy with is every other professional keyboard or piano in the world operates with one form of polarity on the sustain pedal, and they have the opposite. And so I had to go buy a separate sustain pedal that has a selectable switch. But other than that, it worked really great. So then the next step for me was, I was looking at it and I went, well, if Pianotech works that well, I just want to venture out. Even though I'm sure this is going to be a terrible experience and nothing's going to work well, I'm just going to try and see what works on Linux. And so I started downloading other virtual instruments. And what I found was there's a couple of different formats for virtual instruments. One is LV2. That's largely considered to be the preferred for Linux users due to its stability and compatibility. The second is VST3, which is more widely supported across different platforms, but has some stability issues specifically on Linux. And then there are some old formats, LED, SPA, and DSSI, which, to be fair, I haven't even really seen any plugins that are released with that. So I'm just going to skip over those. But LV2 and VSTs are the current standard. And LV2 is the open source standard designed for Linux software, and it'll probably be the best choice if you're working with most open source tools. So I say all of that to say that that's kind of the landscape. The plugins that I've been playing with have all been VST3, and mostly because that was supposedly going to be the worst possible experience, and I just kind of wanted to see how far it could go. I did find out that Steinberg released VST3 under a dual license, proprietary and GPL3. And so if you're interested in having, if you're at all musically inclined and want to kind of play around with this stuff, there are a couple I would draw your attention to. So the first is Pianotech. Pianotech is available as a standalone software, so you can just open it up and run it, and it works great. The other thing is, though, they release it as a VST or as a plugin, so you can pull it into Ardour, which I did. So I installed Ardour and added Pianotech as a plugin, and then mapped my MIDI controller to it. So I was playing it through Ardour. Works great, loved it. So then I said, so can I venture out? And the second one that I downloaded was a drum VST called MT Power Drum Kit, and that worked super well. And the thing that I learned is that some of these plugins charge money, and some of them are more egregious than others. So Pianotech, the limitations are it runs for 30 minutes and then you got to restart it, which isn't the end of the world. The other thing is they take some of the black keys away from you. Again, not the end of the world. MT Power Drum Kit is my favorite insofar as they're the least egregious for if you don't have the money to spend. If you give them the $10 or whatever they're asking for, then it unlocks this feature. Otherwise, the only thing you have to do is when you launch the plugin, you just got to open it and click on an accept button that says it's silent until I click accept. No big deal. The most egregious and yet the most fun that I've had was from a software called TAL, and they have the TAL Baseline 101. And so basically what I was doing, my process was I used the MT Power Drum Kit to put down some beats. Then I used the TAL Baseline 101 to lay down a bass line. And then I layered it on top with Piano Tech to do the melody and kind of plunk around. And the thing that was cool about TAL Baseline is there are just so many cool sounds that are just fun to play with. In fact, they're cool enough and intriguing enough that I kind of thought, I think what I'm going to do is at some point, if there's interest in it, I'll bring it into the studio and we can do it live on the air, try some different ones or play some different ones and as I kind of get into it. Now, the TAL Baseline 101 had the most egregious please pay me. It's first of all, it's the most expensive at $70. The second thing is it introduces static every so often for a few seconds if you don't pay them. So it's not really usable in any sort of long-term way, again, unless you pay them their money, which, is fine. I get it. They need to stay in business and I'm thankful that they're producing Linux native things. But I have a particular profound appreciation for things like the MT Power Drum that let me use it without I don't have to pay anything. I can just play with it and get an idea of how it works. And I'm thankful to all of them that I'm able to at least get an idea of if it would work on Linux before I give anybody any money. So that was kind of the rabbit hole, Steve, that I fell down. I have a I don't know, an aspiration, a hope, a desire, a thing to see if there's ever a warm, welcoming reception to drag you into the music sphere, either by way of banjo or by the way of piano or by the way of just some instrument that we can kind of rock out with sometime. And I, so far as I understand it, my challenge is not necessarily the interest in music. It's just a time thing. There's only so many seconds in the day, as it turns out.
Yep. As it turns out, only so many seconds in the day. And I don't know. Right now, I have other things on my plate.
You hear that? Tape backup. That's probably not something you've heard recently, but it is still wildly popular in places where somebody needs to dump a tremendous amount of data, and you don't want to do that for the most cost-effective way. So, Steve, you have some professional experience with this back when you worked with IMAX. Tell me about what your experience with tape has been.
So, I mean, we're going back a ways, but it's slow but reliable. One of the things that made it useful, well, first of all, there's some level of obscurity because someone walks into your office and you have a hard drive or you've got a tape laying around. One, you have to go to eBay and figure out which tape type it is and go buy it and stick it in and then wait for it to dump off. And the other one, you just grab and throw it in any $5 USB to SATA adapter that you've got kind of laying around. So, I mean, there's some security through obscurity from that. But on the whole, tape drives tend to be cheaper. Not the drives themselves, but the tapes themselves tend to be cheaper because they're slower. Not only that, with the latest kind of craze with AI eating all of the things, turns out they're not particularly interested in tape drives, so I don't see those spiking anytime soon.
So talk to me a little bit about the tar command, because this is one of those things that like we use for a number of things and don't really associate it with tape, and yet that's where it came from.
The tar command literally stands for tape archive, and it was meant exactly for writing data to tapes. And so we use it today to create tar balls and just pass them around as kind of a zipped up compression format. But large segments of the population are still using the tar command to interact with tapes because that's what it's used for.
Can you give me a crash course if somebody hasn't used tar before? What does that look like, or how would somebody get started with tar?
Well, I mean, it's got kind of the cryptic command line. One of the things that I thought was funny. There was an XKCD, of course there was, several years ago, where it was like something along the lines of, in order to disarm the nuclear device, you only had to type in the tar command appropriately without making any mistakes. And of course, the world ends, and then it's two angels saying, "I'm sorry, I tried." So tar is kind of cryptic for anything more advanced than just creating an archive. And even then, unless you do it on the regular or you have flags that you've memorized, it is kind of cryptic. I don't think that it would work very well to have a crash course in tar, because I would just be spouting out some gibberish. But honestly, these days, tar is so well known that throw it into your favorite LLM, go read a man page. There are even tutorials online all over the place for how tar works and how you might interact with it, because I don't think it makes for particularly good, interesting discussion.
Is it worth saying that, like, tar and then TAC, C for create, V for verbose, and F for file, give it a file name and then space what you want to tar up, and that will create a tar archive of thing, and then tar, TAC, X for extract, V for verbose, F for file, give it the same file name for the tar, and it will unpack the tar thing that you've packed up.
Yep, you can do that. You can also combine it with bzip or gunzip or any other of several. It supports tons of different compression like xzip and so on, if you wanted to add compression to it. So it's pretty flexible these days. It really depends. The flags and what's available depends on the operating system and how old it is and what version of tar and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, the basics are pretty easy. It's getting to, how do I use this thing to jump back and forth in the archive? Because essentially the way that you read files from tape is you jump back and forth to its position in the tape and you extract it or otherwise kind of capture it.
Talk to me about data velocity. You first brought this up. Actually, we talked about it in one of your talks at Southeast Linux Fest, and you were talking in terms of monitoring, and I asked a question and you brought up the concept of data velocity. Tell me what data velocity is and why that's an important thing, not just how much space you're using.
So in general, the concept that we're dealing with, especially, it applies to data for sure, but it also applies to any type of thing that you are measuring. There's a big difference between going from 10 to 12 in a number over a month's period of time versus going from 10 to 11 in the next hour. And it all has to do with, are you measuring your high and low watermarks, right? So a high watermark is like, this is, if I hit 95% full, you know, that's a really big problem. And so you want to start charting these things based on burn rate. That's ultimately, if as an SRE, that's the type of language that we use. We talk about burn rate, right? So velocity and burn rate are often interchanged, and it depends on who it is that you're talking to, which terminology they'll use. But essentially, a low burn rate is predictable and easy for you to determine, like, when do I need to life cycle this out or buy a new hard drive or whatever it is. When it becomes more difficult is when your burn rate spikes to something crazy, because that means that you're, instead of that slow, predictable pattern to filling up your drive, you're about to fall off a cliff or much faster than you anticipated. And so ultimately, your idea behind velocity is to try and determine, in some relative form of accuracy, how quickly do I need to react to a problem or filling up or whatever.
So I have a client that is willing to come on the show if there's an interest in it. And so if there is an interest in what I'm about to say, I'd invite you to let us know by sending an email to live@asknoahshow.com. But effectively what we're looking for is somebody who is using a tape system with ZFS in production. Now, here's what he's looking for. And then, Steve, I think you have some ideas as to why we might be going down the wrong rabbit hole. And if so, maybe we need to kind of stop and course correct here. But what he's wanting to do is build an archive and then use ZFS send to create backups on tape. And he's curious if anybody has experience doing this in production. When I asked him, is the goal here to reconstruct the data set or just find a specific file? The answer I got back was, it's there only for disaster recovery, but to rebuild the entire data set. So with that information in mind, Steve, would you say that we are going down the right rabbit hole of tape? And would you say that ZFS send on tape is a wise idea, or is there a better solution?
Well, I guess it depends on whether you think that you will always be able to keep a data set within the size of a tape archive, right? So all kinds of factors play into whether that's a good idea. I in general don't like this approach. I know there are going to be people that will disagree with it, but one of the things that you're probably not going to do is you're probably not going to really want to restore the data set from tape. So if you're trying to restore the data set, that would tell me that you've suffered some sort of critical failure in not only your mirror, but wherever you're normally sending your snapshots and your replication to.
Mm-hmm.
That being the case, if you've got a data set that is of any appreciable size, it's going to take a long time via TAR or via tape to restore that data set, right? Because generally speaking, you're talking about terabytes of data on a tape. You're probably not buying a tape that's like 100 gigs. You're probably buying a tape that's several terabytes in size. And so the first consideration is my data set ever going to outgrow the tape? My second is, as we kind of alluded to with the previous caller, unless you are literally replicating the entire data set every time, as opposed to doing incremental replication, you're going to have to be able to have access to all the snapshots that you need to go from nothing to a fully restored data set. And maybe that's fine. But I don't see the purpose of this. When the purpose of archiving something is to be able to withdraw specific files, I don't see the purpose of going to the level of complexity to try and set up a tape to be able to catch like a ZFS replication or a ZFS target. You probably can do it. For the life of me, I can't fathom why you would want to do this.
What would you say the go-to tools are? I mean, is there something outside of TAR that you would use? I know there's Bacula and some other things that have native support for tape and are kind of built for doing those things. Would you leverage any of those tools, or would you say TAR they kind of got it right the first time?
Well, again, it really depends. It's hard to know outside of the scope. So one of the things that's really good, if you use those backup utilities, if you have a data set, and I don't even mean a ZFS data set, I just mean like a set of data that is so big that it spans multiple tapes, or you need to have the 3-2-1 and have multiple tapes of different versions of the thing. Those types of things like Bacula or Borg or any of those, where the data set, where the program itself is tracking which tape has which bit of data on it for you, is highly advantageous. If that's not the case, I again have a hard time coming to grips with the idea that you would do anything more complex. Like at the end of the day, if you're going to tape, you've had a disaster. If you have a disaster, you probably want to keep your disaster recovery as simple as possible. To me, that's a label on there that's like, this is the backup of this folder from this date. And that's it. And when it's, instead of having, like, I don't want to disparage Borg or any of those others, because I think they legitimately have their place. We use them at IMAX and they're fantastic. If you stick your tapes in a corral, it'll tell you in slot number 1 of corral 5 is the tape that you need, and it will rotate the disc and all that sort of fun stuff. But when you're talking about, I need to get at specific things and I need to make sure that this is as accessible as possible, where those programs fall down is if that database gets corrupted or you shift things around or something, there is a failure domain there. There's no failure domain from, here's a label, I've put these files on there, and then you actually have at the front of the drive a text file with everything that's on that drive. That's pretty, like the physical media has to fail for that to have a failure domain.
So you're okay. I think I'm starting to pick up what you're getting at, is that there are advantages in ZFS when you're going to other drives, but the level of complexity starts to actually impede the ability to dig through the data.
Well, yeah, because essentially you would have to have the tape drive has to then have the ZFS format on it, which means it has to be plugged into and understood by a drive and a computer that's plugged into it. If you just take a tape drive and you stick it on literally any Linux box or even some Windows boxes and it's just a straight up tape, there's no complexity there. And I don't understand what that buys you. Like, it buys you some simplicity from, it's really easy to send snapshot, like do a replication from here to there once it's all set up, as opposed to like a script that just like tars up a directory whenever you throw a tape at it. So there is some there. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say something out loud, and then you can say like, "Yep, that's exactly what I'm getting at," or "No, you're missing it." If I tell you we're a ZFS shop, so we do everything on ZFS, you're saying, "Yeah, but in this case, there isn't an advantage to keeping it all in one sandbox."
I would say that I don't see it. Someone out there might have more experience with this and give me a really good reason. But again, if I'm trying to restore a data set off of tape, this seems like a really bad idea. And if that's not the angle that I'm trying to protect against, and I just need to get files, then this is overly complex for that.
Well, I just got a message from him, and he says he's really enjoying the feedback from Steve. So apparently we are. This is the exact kind of pushback that he was looking for. But all that to say, so he says the archive is on ZFS. It would be split into 16 terabyte file systems, each one on a tape, and the archive is read only, one snapshot per file system, 18 terabyte tapes. So that was kind of the premise that he's starting from. It sounds like there's maybe some needless complexity here, and there are maybe some more simplistic ways to do it that would in end make it easier to actually go and recover stuff if we ever get to the point to go to do that. And to your point, in other places where we don't have ZFS, and or even if they have ZFS on the file system, but they're not looking to dump in its entirety, typically a folder with the year and then months and then stuff inside of there is a pretty typical organizational scheme that I've seen that seems to work pretty well.
At the end of the day, as you get what you pay for, right? So you're getting the architect's brain. You've asked the architect. The architect says, I don't understand the full scope of what we're trying to do. And so giving you an answer is not something that I'm wired to do. I want to know what my requirements are, and then I will give you an answer. And so far, I haven't heard requirements. Yeah.
Well, I think we leave it at an open-ended thing. I think he's willing to join the show to the extent that maybe you and him would just go head to head and just have a conversation on here's what he's thinking. And I don't think he's at all married to a solution. I think he's kind of thinking about things and is looking for reasons not to do it one way or to do it another way. And I think you've given him exactly that. So thank you for doing that. And thanks for sharing your experience. It's amazing how IMAX got you into the technical sphere, got you started on that thing. And that experience still comes back to help everybody out time and time again, huh?
I have always been grateful for my time at IMAX. It was very formative. I learned a lot.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Would you ever see yourself going to tape stuff, or are hard drives, the data, the burn rate, as you put it, that you go through data is not really ever going to get to a point that hard drives become impractical?
I'm not sure that I would do anything like that. Maybe if I was to ship something off like that to you, for example, like here's a thing of all of my photos, right? Maybe that makes some sense. But this types of stuff that I archive, I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, Steve, I really appreciate the expertise. As always, the music in our ears means we're out of time. We thank you for joining us. The show, we record it every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central at AskNoahShow.com. You can go to podcast.AskNoahShow.com. There you'll find all of the past episodes and resources, all the show notes, the things that it takes to put the show together. There's always more in there than we have time to get to, and I invite you to check them out. Follow us on the interwebs. He's at Linux Ovens. I'm at Kernel Linux. You can also check out my site, noahc.us. We're back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central at AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week.